Ever since their success with Street Fighter II, Capcom faced an ongoing dilemma. They had gone through numerous attempts at continuing to satisfy their fans, but determining what that next step should be soon became the problem. The Alpha series went huge by including everything, the EX series went toward polygonal fighting, and Street Fighter III went in a new direction that resulted in unfamiliarity. For their next attempt at reinvigorating fighting games, Capcom decided to give fans what they wanted by combining the familiar and the new in one big fantasy battle. In 1994, Capcom produced a fighting game using characters under license from Marvel Comics. The game was titled X-Men: Children of the Atom. In the game, the player could choose to play as a number of popular X-Men along with a number of villains from the comic book series. The fighting system was based on Capcom's other fighting games like Street Fighter II and Darkstalkers. The game also featured new abilities for a fighting game such as the Super Jump, Tech Hits, and Super Combo moves. Overall, X-Men: Children of the Atom was praised for being one of the better made comic book based games at the time, as well as a solid fighting game. The series continued the following year when Capcom released Marvel Superheroes, a fighting game that featured a broader cast of superheroes and supervillains from the Marvel Comics line. The game played similar to X-Men: Children of the Atom, but simplified the use of the Super Combo gauge and added the ability to use Infinity Gems, which allowed for special attacks. For the next sequel, Capcom decided to combine their Marvel fighting game series with their popular Street Fighter series and what would come to be known as X-Men vs. Street Fighter. It was released in arcades in 1996. As the title would imply, the game featured characters from the X-Men franchise and the Street Fighter series. X-Men vs. Street Fighter was the first game to blend a tag team style of combat with the gameplay systems of both fighting game series. Instead of the usual best 2 out of 3 round format in the prior games, a match would consist of a 2-on-2 tag battle. Players could swap between two characters at any time and perform a combination of super moves with both characters at once. While one character is fighting, the other one will be able to recover a portion of their vitality. If one of the characters is defeated, the other one must come into the fight. The match would end once both characters on a team are defeated. The Street Fighter characters were pulled from the versions found in Street Fighter Alpha 2, but were given upgraded moves to have them on the same over-the-top level as the Marvel games. They included Ryu, Ken, Cammy, Chun-Li, Charlie, Zangief, Dhalsim, M. Bison, and Akuma. The X-Men characters from the Marvel fighting games remained mostly the same as they were in their original games. They included Cyclops, Storm, Juggernaut, Magneto, and Wolverine. 3 new characters included in this game were Rogue, Gambit, and Sabretooth. The final boss of the game was Apocalypse, who lacked a tag partner but made up for it with his large size. When X-Men vs. Street Fighter arrived in the arcades, it was met with a widely positive response from the fans. Many fans enjoyed the new streamlined style of the game along with the entire versus concept. While the frenetic gameplay and visuals became the latest craze, its simplified gameplay and balance issues kept the game from catching on among longtime competitive players. This would become more of a problem once the game arrived on consoles. The game was first ported to the Sega Saturn in 1997 and took advantage of the 4MB RAM cartridge add-on to produce a perfect arcade emulation. The game became rare in Japan as it had arrived in the declining years of the Saturn. Because of this, the game was never released in other regions until it was ported to the PlayStation in 1998. But due to the system's RAM limitations, the port was inferior to the arcade version in many aspects. The game became choppy and a victim to slowdown and long load times. Even the game's key tag team feature was reduced back to the best 2 out of 3 round format. The only way to have a tag team match was for both players to choose the same 2 characters in the crossover mode. With a rare Saturn port and terrible PlayStation port, many fans skipped over the game when it came to the consoles. Still, the game's growing popularity in the arcades was enough for Capcom to warrant another sequel. In June 1997, Capcom released in arcades a sequel to their crossover fighting game with Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter. Along with balancing some of the previous game's problems, the game ran on an altered engine, though it still looked the same aesthetically. Players could now summon their partner character to perform a special move without having to fully change characters. The same group of Street Fighter characters returned except for Cammy and Charlie, who were replaced by Dan and Sakura. Most of the X-Men characters were replaced with characters from Marvel Superheroes. Along with Wolverine and Cyclops, the Marvel side included Omega Red, Blackheart, Captain America, the Hulk, Shuma Gorath, and Spider-Man. Apocalypse was still the final boss, but he was now joined by Cyber Akuma, a more powerful version of Shin Akuma. There are many secret characters in the game that came from palette swaps of other characters with different moves, such as US Agent, Mephisto, Armored Spider-Man, Mecha Zangief, Sunburned Sakura, and Shadow. Perhaps the strangest additional character in Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter was one that remained exclusive in Japan. Norimaro was an original character created and owned by a Japanese comedian named Noritake Kanashi. He appears in the Japanese version of the game as a nerdy, cowardly, school-type guy with a camera and a bag of various toy dolls. Norimaro was meant to be an odd character who served as a fan of the other fighters in the game. He was originally planned to be in the other versions of the game, but due to cultural differences and many references to him stealing Chun-Li's panties, Capcom decided to make him not selectable outside Japan. A port of this game arrived on the Sega Saturn in Japan in 1998 and on the PlayStation in other regions in 1999. Just like X-Men vs. Street Fighter before it, the game suffered from a limited Saturn release and emulation problems on the more available PlayStation version. After the success of Marvel Superheroes vs. Street Fighter, Capcom decided that for their next sequel, they should expand beyond just their Street Fighter franchise. This would lead to the addition of characters from Capcom's other fighting games as well as their other beloved franchises. The next game's premise would be more than just a clash between fighting game franchises, but instead a clash between two companies. On January 1998, Capcom released Marvel vs. Capcom Clash of Superheroes in the arcades. While the gameplay was primarily similar to the two previous games, the new main features include the ability to summon an assist character and the duo team attack. Instead of players summoning their partner character to perform a special move, the function was now given to an additional character players could choose alongside their main tag team. These special partners consisted of many characters from both companies that either existed in prior fighting games or were just included for this feature. The duo team attack allowed a player to control both characters on a team simultaneously with unlimited super moves for a brief period of time. The only Street Fighter characters who remained in the main roster were Ryu, Chun-Li, and Zangief. They were joined by many popular characters from Capcom's other franchises who were now fitted for the fighting game. These included Morrigan from Darkstalkers, Captain Commando, a former mascot to Capcom, Jin Saotome from Cyberbots, Strider Hiryu, and Mega Man. On the Marvel side, Spider-Man, Captain America, the Hulk, Wolverine, and Gambit were joined by Venom and War Machine. The new final boss was Onslaught, who had to be defeated by the player in two different forms. Secret characters mostly consisted of palette swaps of other characters such as Hyper War Machine, High Speed Venom, and Orange Faster Hulk based on his previous iteration, Morrigan with Lilith's color scheme and movesets, and Shadow Lady. The only secret character to have her own unique sprites was Roll from Mega Man. In 1999, fans were able to receive a greater emulation of the game when it was ported to the Dreamcast. The PlayStation version still suffered from issues and compromises similar to previous installments. The idea of clashing both Marvel's and Capcom's franchises together in a fighting game proved to be successful for Capcom, who decided to expand on the concept once more. For the next installment, Capcom decided to bring together the best of both companies into their biggest fighting game yet. It would not only lead to an evolution to the series' design and scope, but in the technology behind it as well. Back in 1998, Sega introduced the Sega Naomi engine, which stood for New Arcade Operation Machine IDEA. It was the latest successor in Sega's arcade system boards with technology based on their latest game console, the Sega Dreamcast. Unlike most hardware platforms in the arcade industry, Naomi would become widely licensed for use by other game manufacturers and one of the longest running arcade platforms ever. This new engine would be utilized for the next game in Capcom's Versus series. In 2000, Capcom released their fourth installment in the Versus series with Marvel vs. Capcom 2, New Age of Heroes. With the Naomi engine, the game would feature 2D character sprites with 3D seen in the backgrounds and various other effects. In order to bring in new players, Capcom simplified the fighting engine to make the game more accessible to casual players. The Super Combo gauge was increased to 5 levels instead of 3, which allowed for players to link Super Combo moves together between characters. The air combo system was changed as well as the game's control scheme. The former 6-button configuration was changed to 4 main buttons and 2 assist buttons. Also, the series' 2-on-2 tag team feature was increased to 3-on-3 teams. The game features all the main characters from the previous Marvel fighting games and the Versus series, along with additions from both companies. The Marvel side was joined by Cable, Colossus, Iceman, Iron Man, Doctor Doom, Mero, Psylocke, Sentinel, Silver Samurai, Spiral, Thanos, and an additional Wolverine with a regular bone structure instead of the adamantium claws. The Capcom side added Anakaris, Baby Bonnyhood, and Felicia from Darkstalkers, Guile from Street Fighter Alpha 3, Hayato from Star Gladiator, Jill Valentine from Resident Evil, Tronbon and Servbot from Mega Man Legends. Capcom also created 3 new additional characters for the game. Amingo is a cactus-shaped, sombrero-wearing humanoid who could reshape his body into various plant forms. Sun is a monkey girl who is the granddaughter of a character with the same name from a Capcom arcade game in 1984. Ruby Heart, the lead character of the game, is a French pirate who summons the Marvel and Capcom characters together into a battle against a new evil. This new evil is known as Abyss, the final boss of the game. Abyss is a creature that threatens to bring the world back to primordial times by killing all life in the process and must be defeated by the player in its 3 different forms. Marvel vs. Capcom 2 became an instant hit when it arrived in arcades. Fans loved the game's massive 56-character roster that allowed for multiple possibilities and playstyles. With the high level of action possible on screen, the game was just as much fun to play as it was to watch. The simplified control scheme and easy-to-learn combos were great for casual players, and there was even depth to be found for the hardcore players. While the game was a feast for comic book and fighting game fans, there were still a few things people were displeased about. Some people found the action to be too fast-paced to easily keep up with, which made the game feel less methodical compared to prior Street Fighter games. With so many characters to choose from, the game was incredibly unbalanced. If a player had the right set of characters, they could easily defeat someone else, which made it possible for the game to feel really cheap at times. Also, the game's soundtrack wasn't exactly what people would expect from a typical fighting game. The music featured a strange sort of jazzy lounge music that people either loved for being out of place or hated to death for its happy, upbeat rhythms. Since Marvel vs. Capcom 2 ran on Sega's Naomi engine, the game was initially ported to the Dreamcast in 2000. The Japanese version of the game actually had an online feature which allowed players to battle against one another over a specialized network. They could also hook up their VMU to the arcade version of the game. This option enabled players to earn points that could be used to unlock characters, stages, and new costume colors. However, when the game arrived in other regions, these options were removed and players had to instead earn points by playing through the game multiple times. Still, they were given the option to trade points with other players by connecting two VMUs together. Ports of the game eventually came to the PlayStation 2 and Xbox in 2002 and 2003, but due to Capcom losing the Marvel license, the game saw a limited print run. With the high demand for the game and limited release, the prices for the game soon skyrocketed in stores and online. However, since the Dreamcast version was the most similar to the Naomi arcade hardware and had a higher number of copies available, it is considered the superior version of the three. In April 2009, Marvel and Capcom announced that the game would be making a return to the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 as a downloadable game and feature online multiplayer. Other updates include widescreen support and an option for smoother or crisper character sprites. The game would be developed by Backbone Entertainment, the same team behind Super Turbo HD Remix, and use the same game code as the Dreamcast version.